Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We are live here on YouTube, and we're thrilled to be welcoming our good friend, Amy Beth Kirsten, to join us over Zoom. And we're going to have a chat here for Sandbox Sunday on Monday. We're still going to call it Sandbox Sunday, though, because that's just what we're doing. So we're really excited to have her here with us. She's written a lot of music, specifically for us, actually, but and we'll talk a bit about that as well. But we want to talk about a lot of the other music that she's written and just kind of her life as a composer and a general awesome person. Um, so
Aw.
I'm gonna pass it over to Johnny, who's gonna get us started off here today.
Yes, we are feeling very lucky to be hanging out with Amy Beth here. And how are you doing today, Amy Beth?
I'm good, Johnny. I'm just hanging out here in rural Ohio doing my thing.
That's right, and that's one thing we've always said is that if there's an upside to these times, it's that we can connect with people who are not in our immediate vicinity. So we're really enjoying that. And a
I was
big
gonna say, I feel like we've gotten to hang out more in the last couple months than we have ever.
It's totally true. Yeah.
Hilarious because when we were working on Quixote, we were working together for 2 years, but I feel like I never really got to hang out with you because it was all work, rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. AB, why are you doing this to us? Work.
Memorize.
Yes,
I
exactly.
know.
So it's very cool. It's a moment of grace, I think, in all this, is like you were saying, is to be able to, hook up with people this way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a big welcome, of course, to all of you watching the stream. We're thrilled to have you all being a part of this as well. And to any of you who are not familiar with AB's work, I'd like to give you just a little background on how amazing she is. She's been the recipient of a few different fellowships, the Guggenheim and Rockefeller fellowships. Heard of those things before. And Academy of Arts and Letters Music Award recipient as well. And she's written for members of the Chicago Symphony and the New World Symphony, Eighth Blackbird. She has her own ensemble called Howl. When did you start that up?
2012, 13.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's still going strong, right?
It's going through a bit of a change right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
Well,
not.
you're still going strong.
Well, yeah. Well, everyone is, but yeah. I mean, I started it as a kind of, I don't know. I had such a great experience working with Eighth Blackbird, and I realized that kind of theatrical work and the collaboration, I wanted to try and keep that going, and so I thought it'd be great to have my own group, and so, and we put on some concerts, which you guys were involved with at the very beginning, and then and then you all came and joined Howl for the 2 years that we were working on Quixote, which was really cool. And after Quixote, Howl did Savior, and now I'm sort of like, I'm understanding that it's maybe not, it's less of a performance ensemble and more of a collection of artists who work together all the time. So I'm sort of thinking about restructuring it a little bit in that way, but I don't know, I haven't landed on anything yet. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, well, that feels actually consistent with how I've seen it. It's more like how is a state of mind or something more than
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, well, and Amy Beth does some teaching as well. Currently, I mean, what you're in Ohio for right now, teaching at Oberlin and at Longy in Boston. You've done stuff at Yale, Princeton, Cornell. I mean, I think that's actually quite a bit of teaching. How long have you been doing that stuff for?
Well, the Yale, Princeton, Cornell, those are like guest composer talks,
Okay.
and those are always really fun to do, and sometimes there's master classes involved with that as well. But I've been teaching for a long time. Gosh, since I was in school at Peabody, I was teaching at Peabody in the theory department, and that was, gosh, 2009, I think. So it's been almost 10 years. Yeah. Um, But it's really fun. I really enjoy it. It's become I don't know. It's become something that I didn't think I would enjoy so much, but it turns out that I don't know. There's just something about sharing those aha moments with students. I remember being one not so long ago, and hearing pieces for the first time that just changed my way of thinking, and to be able to share that experience with younger people. I don't know. It's super cool.
Yeah, it would be great to pick your brain more about that as we dig into it here. And just my last thoughts that I'll lend to our audience here about Amy Beth are that you really write some of the most like unique sounding music that is still beautiful and really touching that I've ever heard. Like every time I hear a new piece by you, I know I'm going to hear something that I've never heard before, and that's not something I can say about a lot of composers even today. And I think that's really remarkable. You have an incredibly brave way of composing, and you have the heart of a lion.
Thank you, Johnny. That's very sweet.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about your work, I'm always struck by the creative way that you make these atmospheres, these textures, and I'd be so interested to hear a little bit about how you arrived at this way of composing, how you arrived at the thought that working with folks who are outside of our discipline, people from the theater world or other disciplines like that, was something that you were interested in. How you started to develop this idea of creating these new instruments to use in all your pieces, all of these sorts of things.
Well, do I have to answer that question as myself, or can I answer it as a figure from history? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, those are really good questions. I mean, so much comes into my mind as I'm thinking about how to answer that. You know, Well, I once heard one of the players from the Henschel Quartet. It's a string quartet based in Berlin. Monica said that she plays like her life depends on it. And I thought, that's amazing. And I wonder if I could do the same thing as a composer. And I guess that probably would mean different things for different people. But I think for me, it has to do with it's following a curiosity, following a question that I have, and not thinking, I guess, not thinking about whether it's okay or not. I mean, I my training is largely from outside of classical music, so I don't, which is a blessing and a curse, but I don't have kind of the burden of the history in some ways stopping me, and I feel more like akin to an outsider artist in some ways, where I just I let myself kind of go to places and explore the tangents that are interesting to me. So it has to do with that more than anything, I think, and feeling like that's where my lifeblood really is in curiosity and exploration, rather than having all the answers all the time, because there's no fun in that, you know. So I think that's the philosophy where I don't know, the voice comes from, if it can be called that.
Yeah, no, I think that's so well said. I mean, just to give the folks who are watching a sense of this, like when we get when we get a new piece from Amy, it's so often scored for something that we never imagined would be an instrument that we would play, or something that we would spend a lot of time practicing the technique of. But Amy has spent weeks and weeks and many hours developing that technique, and is like all too happy to share with us all the things that she's found, and is very interested in the ways that we figure out how to play these things. So I'm talking about things like books. So we did this huge evening length theatrical piece with Amy a few years ago, in which much, or not much of it, but a lot of it was scored for books. And Amy spent a very long period of time developing this whole language of sounds to get on the books that we then had to learn together. And the result was this incredible tapestry of color and sound that if you had told me before I heard any of the stuff that she wrote that you could get all of these from a book, I would have said that you were crazy because I just didn't think that that was possible. And to hear you talk about the exploration or the curious nature of your personality, I think that's so true. And it's something that definitely has inspired me when we worked with you is to never look at an object as just a book or something like that, but like you do, realize that there's so much potential in that to make beautiful music out of it.
Thanks, Ian.
No,
That's
of
great.
course.
Yeah, I'm also just curious, Amy. Maybe you already kind of touched on this a little bit, but sort of like the early stages of you becoming a composer, because so much of your music is. I feel like you've really kind of like found a really amazing, unique voice for yourself. But I know that that has come through a lot of like practice and experimentation and just a lot of composing. So I'm curious, like, I don't know, what was like your first piece you ever wrote?
My hmm. my the first well, I mean that's my first piece in school. Okay, so I had my first composition lesson when I was 30, when I was getting a master's degree, which apparently is late. I don't know. I think I think everyone's on their own time scale.
Yeah.
Um, but the first piece I wrote in school was for a friend of mine, uh, Yane, who is this incredible violinist, and it was for violin and piano, and and I don't know, I just wrote something, and there was like knocking on the piano and stuff, and there was this technique that he had to do, which I called a reverse grace note. So the idea that you end a sustained note with a grace note instead of starting a note with a grace note. And he was like, "Gosh, I've never really seen this before." And I was like, "Cool, okay, yeah." And I mean, it was just like it started with little experiments like that, and then as I started to become a little bit more brave, I went back to school to get a master's degree because I wanted to learn about the orchestral instruments so that I could make cool arrangements of my pop songs. That was the reason. I didn't know much about classical music, and I got to school in Chicago at Roosevelt, and during the first couple weeks of school, I heard International Contemporary Ensemble play a concert down the street. And on the concert was Peter Maxwell Davies' Eight Songs for a Mad King and Vox Ballene by Crumb. And I'd never heard anything like this before, and it just like my head exploded. And then, I was taking all this really cool rep courses, the history of 20th century music and all that. And it just like, those things really changed my life. And suddenly I kind of turned my back in some ways on my all the pop songs and the pop music that I'd been listening to, because I was so incredibly just inspired by this other stuff, um so and then but there was something about the way that my music came out had something still to do with being a singer-songwriter, because that's what I had been doing for 10 years before I entered the master's program. And I think that thing, that stayed was this sense of the kind of one performer who does multiple things, you know?
Yeah.
So the player who vocalizes, the player who moves around, the sense of storytelling, the attention to lyrics and words and how important those are. I think that's all stemming from writing songs for so
Yeah.
many years.
Well, that's so interesting because a lot of sorry, Terry.
No.
A lot of some of the things in if you take Quixote for example, like Cobwebs Rust, that's essentially it's a song. It has verses, it has choruses, there's text, and it's just like put through like this filter that is just like so like otherworldly and creative. You know, it's like you almost don't think like, oh, that's a song. You know, it's just like kind of occupies like in its own separate sort of musical world. I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about your music.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like you say it more eloquently than we do, but I've always said that it sounds like alien music.
Yeah,
Like
you're
music
not the
that
first person that said that.
it somehow landed on a UFO from another galaxy far, far away.
I love it. I think
Yeah.
maybe that should be a new genre.
Yeah.
Alien music. I wonder, could you talk a little bit about, so you mentioned pop music. Is that what you were doing before you were 30 and studying composing or taking composition lessons? What were the first 30 years?
The first 30 years. Well, I like many people, I took piano lessons. I started in 6th grade and I played piano all through most of my undergrad in college and a little bit in my master's degree. So piano was important, but and so that was like and I sang in choir. I was a choir geek. And when I lived in Chicago, while I was a singer-songwriter, I was also doing a little bit of off loop theater, like as sound design or writing music for productions, creating musicals with amateur theater groups and yeah, what else? Oh, and I spent a lot of time, doing the bad gig, like playing piano at a fancy restaurant on Mother's Day, or or like a singer-songwriter gig. I used to have a Fender Rhodes, that I would play with my left hand bass lines and a clavinova right hand. That was the thing. And I used to go around to all these different bad gigs, like bowling alleys.
Nice.
There's a place, and I don't know if this is a chain or not, but it's called North Beach. And it's this awful place where it's like you go in and there's an indoor volleyball court in one direction. There are bars everywhere, and bar over here, indoor volleyball court, bar over here, bowling alley, like tennis courts. It's like this horrible thing. And in the middle is this like common area, and I would be set up in this common area, like playing songs for people, and they'd walk by and go Freebird, and it was just like, or playing in a restaurant while it was like, sports was on, some games were on, and no one would pay any attention to me, and I'd be like singing Rocket Man, So there was a lot.
So you've always been fearless.
Yes. What kind of? Oh, so there was a lot of that. I mean, music was always a part of my life, but it's definitely evolved, and it was very, as a lot of people. I mean, it was a very circuitous route to get here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. We talked with Andy Akiho last week, and so much of that really sounds familiar. Like Andy's had similar stories. Like he didn't start composing until much later, and also was playing music in sushi restaurants.
Yeah,
and playing steel pan at chicken restaurants.
I saw Andy play in a sushi restaurant.
You saw Andy perform in a sushi restaurant?
I did.
There you go. I think we have a little song, right, Vic? We have one of your so-called pop songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which one do you want to play? My Life, Dare I Dare You?
Play the early one. Play the one from 1997.
97.
Nice.
This is me and my band. My band's name was Stella!
Exclamation point?
How many exclamation points?
Yeah, and we had one gig, but we made this demo CD. And so this is Pat Kiner on guitar, Eric Swanson on bass, Mark Fury on drums, and Christopher Kriz on piano, and me singing.
Awesome. Okay, let's hear that now. I literally heard this for the first time like an hour ago. And
prepare yourselves. It's very angsty.
It's awesome though. It kicks ass. All right, here we go.
Catch me if you can. I'm too quick. I'm on to you, but you don't know my tricks. I got stuff on my sleeve, a lot more than you. Magic show of blanket truths, I'm never ever coming back. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Think I'm ready now to face my life. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Holding on so tight I cannot seem to find my life. Spin around my land, hocus pocus, hang on to you. I'm gonna get my kicks in, smoke with fear and then you'll see. I'm a mystery, Houdini I will never be. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Think I'm ready now to face my life. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Holding on so tight I cannot seem to find my life. Life, where's my life? Back in the backseat of your car, and if we go that far, it's a mile for your taking life. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Think I'm ready now to face my life. Got my favorite shoes, got my favorite jeans. Holding on so tight I cannot seem to find my life. My life, my life.
Okay, we're back. That is so cool. I'm trying not for there not to be a little delay because I'm listening here on. I think we all are behind the scenes. We're like listening to it on YouTube, and we're just kind of like jamming out here behind the scenes. There's like a little bit of a lag. So there's like 10 seconds, so I'm like cutting us off.
Amy, you were already one of the coolest people I know, but your coolest factor just like went through the roof.
Oh my God.
It's awesome.
Wow. Yeah.
So you're writing songs like that, you're playing gigs like that, and then you go to school to learn more about the instruments so you can add orchestration to these songs, and then you see some of these pieces, and then so you just like turn on a dime, like you want to write contemporary music in that genre. How do you learn more about that repertoire, about that world?
Good question. Well, I mean, I took it slowly. I mean, I spent, I wrote, I think that one piece I told you about for violin and piano my first semester of school, and then I wrote something for saxophone and piano, which was not very good, but the first year, actually, all of the whole of my master's degree, I can tell you that I spent every waking hour that I wasn't in school at the library, score study, listening. And just because I knew that I had so much to ramp up, I didn't know anything. And so I just, and I did the whole thing at Roosevelt. I did orchestration, and I had a really good teacher, Stacy Garrett, and I also studied with David Smook, who now teaches at Peabody, and they're both great composers. And
he was my theory teacher.
Yeah. And one of Smook's teachers was George Crumb, so that made a lot of sense. And I actually, I give Smook a lot of credit for helping me, actually, because he, I studied with him over a summer, and the lessons were, I don't think he would, I think he would be okay with me saying this, but they were kind of difficult because, I was very protective of myself and my work, and I wasn't, I think I was afraid of what the teachers were going to say. And so having a composition lesson was always something that was excruciating for me, and the lessons with Smook were sort of spaced out so that we would meet for a couple hours, a month or something. It wasn't a regular thing. I'd bring in like a little tiny bit of music, and we'd sit at the piano, and he would like play through all the intervals and talk about why this was a good choice and why this could have been better or more elegant, he would say, and it was like, but I was dying because I was like, oh my God, like that, like seriously, we have to think like that, like, oh, so it was really, and he wasn't very impressed with most of the stuff that I brought in, and I remember getting really frustrated and going home one day, and I love you, Smook, don't worry. and getting really frustrated and going home and like just, just throwing things off the table and being like, I can't do this. And I was, crying and stuff. And that day, out of frustration, I sat down and wrote the thing that was going to become me. It was like the first thing that that really, I think, represents where I am now. And it's because of him. It's because and I've heard quotes and stuff from people, other artists who say, sometimes people just need something to push up against, and he was really unsatisfied with the stuff I was bringing in, and I was too in the end, and so that that me having to push up against him really forced me to do something differently, to try a different approach, and that was actually the first time that I wasn't composing at the piano. I sang everything, and I recorded myself, and I improvised, and I did layers of tracks and everything, and it was just like sound effects and that kind of stuff, and I brought that to him the next lesson, and I notated everything like really precisely, and it took ages to do that, and I brought that into him, and he looked at me and he said, whatever you did to make this, you must keep doing it, and it was a breakthrough moment, I think, and a lesson I'll never forget.
Is that a piece now?
It was. It's not anymore. I don't.
Darn.
No, it's fine. It's so early. It's not anywhere to be found except in the archives. But
right.
It was important. Yeah.
That's so amazing to hear. Like, I feel like people, a lot of people talk all the time about an influential teacher or a moment in their life, but I'm not sure I've ever heard a story that is so specific like this. This one thing happened. I was at my breaking point. I didn't know what to do. So I threw it all aside and I started doing the thing that I now do with my life. Yeah. That's really, really amazing. I wish we could hear that piece.
Well, you're not gonna.
Before we leave this part of your life, though, we got a question actually from Molly Netter, who I know you know well.
Molly!
Yeah. Molly, who's an amazing singer. Thanks so much for watching, Molly. She wanted to know, who were some of your biggest influences as a singer-songwriter?
Molly sang in a piece of mine from 2018, Savior. She's fantastic. I have stories about Molly. Hi, Calvin. I know he's there too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. Biggest influences. I think Kate Bush was a big influence. I think back then, Tori Amos was a big influence. Her first album especially, that was really Little Earthquakes. I think that was her first album. And people like, I don't know, my dad was a big pop music person. So pretty much everything that he listened to, like Bob Seger and, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney and Wings and, Whitney Houston. I mean, just a lot of pop music was kind of floating around me at the time, and and folk tunes, just the kind of the songs around the campfire, Bob Dylan, all of those people for whom lyrics play a really intrinsic role. I was never really into pop music where the lyrics were empty or I couldn't make sense of them. The lyrics had to be poetry.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. Like, just thinking about your work and how carefully you consider the words when you're writing them or when you're setting them, how long you take and how much effort you put into internalizing those words before you ever actually do anything with them. So that makes a lot of sense. so I'm going to jump a little bit in your life now. Hopefully, not going to jump too far. But Johnny was talking a little bit earlier about the piece that you wrote for Eighth Blackbird, Columbine's Paradise Theater, which I feel like, and I could totally be wrong about this, but it was one of your earlier sort of very large scale theatrical works. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that project happened, how you came to be in this position to take up a project like that, and what that experience was like.
You know what's really funny about all this? I feel like you guys have known me for so long that I feel like you could actually give the answers, and I could guess what the question is, like Jeopardy, you know, like you know,
what is Columbine's Paradise?
What is the Big Bang Theory? You know, Alex, I'll take primates for 700. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just so hilarious. But yeah. I guess we can't really do that. It would be fun though.
We'll do a remix.
Amy, you're giving away the whole game. Yeah. We don't know anything about you. We're just asking you these questions.
I am curious how you transitioned into like the long form though, like these evening length works. I mean, eventually with Quixote, which was 80 minutes or something like that, 90, yeah. So it's and Savior, yeah. Like how did that kind of beckon you?
Well, you know, you were asking about Columbine's Paradise Theater, and that, what a ride. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, you know. I had this vision in my head of, because I grew up in the Chicago area, so I knew who Eighth Blackbird was, and I'd seen them perform, and I knew that they had a penchant for movement on stage, kind of, you know, blocking, not really choreography, but more just movement and memorization of very hard music, and so I got a chance to work with them at this festival that doesn't exist anymore, called Music X, which happened in Switzerland, and I went 2 summers in a row, and I got to know them a little bit, and as through that I started to kind of talk with them about the possibility of working together on something theatrical, and I basically, you know, it was this just fortuitous thing. I applied to the Guggenheim with this proposal for Columbine's Paradise Theater, and just happened to get it, and you know, I was like, hi, you know, this happened. So this happened, you know, like, and I think they were probably like, holy shit, you know, we have to do this now, you know, or something. I don't know. But yeah. And it was a bit of a bumpy ride, I think, in some respects, because I didn't know how quite to articulate what I wanted, but I knew that I wanted something that was more along the lines of contemporary dance or contemporary theater, where there's not a narrator, and there's not a linear narrative, but it's made up of these images that are placed next to each other, and with the hope that when you get to the end of the piece, all of this meaning will have accumulated. You know, it's like dance, and so anyway, I have a clearer way of talking about it now, I think, hopefully. But yeah, and so it was just, we lucked out, and were able to schedule, you know, 2 years of workshops. And I went into that piece kind of with some sketch material, and we'd have a week-long workshop. And Mark DiChiazzo was the director for that piece, and he was incredibly, he was like the, he was the midwife, you know. He helped this piece come to be in a way that I couldn't have done on my own. So through these, you know, 2 years of workshops, we put this piece together, and that happened. And I don't know how the long form came. I think it was just a matter of needing time scale in order to show what happened. And I notice I don't say tell a story, because I've been too influenced by Gertrude Stein, I think. who says that there are no more stories to tell, but rather than telling a story, you show what happened, and so that's kind of always been my goal. But you need time to do that. You really do.
And I remember the early Howl productions were already sort of moving in that direction. You would create these evening long length experiences. They just wouldn't necessarily be all your music. You would put together evenings of maybe it's this new commission from someone else, a piece by you, something from this person, this old piece, and you would weave them together with sometimes text or things like that. It seems like you were always kind of hinting at it, but Columbine was the first where you had just composed the entire thing. That's right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
What was the Howl show?
Go ahead.
What was the Howl show we did with there was a book, and there was like some speaking from all of us, and like the book like moved around.
Oh yeah.
Was that the one with the lanterns?
That was, I don't remember what the concert was called.
Yeah, there was, anyway, I just remember like you had, you told us which pieces you wanted to be played, and I was like, oh cool, we're going to play these pieces on a concert that Amy Beth is going to put together. And then we got to the rehearsals, and I think my mind was like totally blown, because I was like, oh, there's like this whole other thing happening in this program. like she has constructed this whole idea that I did not see happening,
Just to give a little more context to these concerts that Terry's talking about. So we would get together as Howl, which was just like a group of friends. It was all Amy, like it was Amy's mind. But then she put together all of these people that she loved working with. And she would tell us to learn these pieces, like there'd be a piece of hers, there'd be a Shevsky piece, there'd be a Crumb piece, whatever it happens to be. And then we'd show up to this little hall. What was the
Lyric
called?
Lyric
Hall. And we'd spend all day there and build the show. And there was no budget, there's no lighting grid, there's no anything. So we're like clipping little lights to things, we're learning and memorizing texts, and Mark is teaching us blocking in 30 minutes or something like that. And we would try to create these theatrical experiences, these hour-long things in the day that we had together. And I feel like it was such a good training ground for us to learn how to do this, because I don't think at this point Sandbox had done much theater work at all, and we had been talking about other projects that we might do with you in the future, but at this point in our lives and our careers, we had never done this before. And to try to learn how to do it with no time and no budget, but just the inspiring ideas that you would throw at us was a really, really meaningful moment for me, at least.
Yeah, and then I think like that second show would have been like 2015, I think, served as like kind of the early development of the piece, What They Might Be Giants, that I think eventually kind of made its way into Quixote, if I have that right.
And she is a myth.
I think that show was called Skin and Metal or something like that.
Skin and Metal, okay. And the other one was Poetry and Dream.
That's right.
Nice.
Good one.
That
good
is
memory.
right.
Because Terry, even before they Might Be Giants, which became Medical Exam, She Is a Myth was born in one of these Howl concerts.
It was a trio, right? Yeah. Which some of the techniques made it into Quixote, but that piece is on the album,
Yeah.
We should play an excerpt.
I think we do. We have a clip of They Might Be Giants. Is that right?
We do.
Yeah, so this is a piece for Sandbox and the amazing flute player Tim Monroe, formerly of Eighth Blackbird. This was the first incarnation of this piece that you reworked later, but this is where it all started. Should we talk about the tuning forks before we even play it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I just want to mention too that Mark was at that show, and I think he did some of the blocking or something for that, or maybe he just came to it. But he saw this piece and he said, "Man, it looks like they're performing some sort of surgery." And I was like, "Oh my God, there's going to be a medical exam in Quixote," So it's like, yeah. So, but anyway, the whole tuning fork thing is that this idea that you have. So I got to say all this before. All right. So, so Columbine's Paradise Theater with Eighth Blackbird. One of the things that was a challenge for me was to figure out, I left that whole experience thinking, okay, the next time I do one of these theater pieces, I want people to have total freedom over the space. I don't want anybody to be, stuck behind an instrument. I know it sounds like a crazy thing for a composer to say, but and so when I realized that I wanted Quixote to be percussion and voice, the first thing I thought was, all right, no percussion setups, which
Yeah.
is also slightly mad because what are you going to do, And so, but I like that kind of drastic, extreme limitation because it makes your imagination come to solve problems in a different way than it normally would. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what are some small objects that, four percussionists can carry around that aren't necessarily handheld percussion objects, some different things that are noisemakers. And so, tuning forks are light, and in your costumes, you had all these pockets for different tuning forks, and you played things that were suspended in air, paper, books. Quixote's costume was made, they had objects sewn into it so that you could play him, kind of thing. But yeah, that's kind of the genesis of so what you're going to see now is a piece called They Might Be Giants, which is really a study piece for Quixote. And all the tuning fork work turned into the medical exam in the big piece.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is They Might Be Giants, and this is with flutist Tim Monroe. Okay. Awesome. Just an excerpt.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I haven't heard that one in so long. Wow. So that's an example of those Howl concerts that we were just talking about, like with the homemade lights and the lyric hall in Connecticut.
DIY. It was very, there were a couple of audience members who were like, yeah, I feel like I've been transported back to the 60s,
It's so funny watching that just now. I'm like remembering all of these like musical notes that I was given like many, many times. And like, I feel like I got a little bit better at each time. Like, I feel like one of the ones was the tempo in that one, right? It was like, I don't know, maybe this is too like insider baseball, but we always like would get just too fast, it would always just be too fast. And you were always like all about like that really slow, like fat, like 2 groove,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting to hear it.
And it's funny because I think it's slightly faster in medical exam only because I think there's a vocal part that has to flow in there too. That's different than the flute part was,
Yeah.
And, yeah, you're right.
I remember getting yelled at for going too slow by the vocal.
I like that fat groove though. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, do we want to? I mean, should we play medical exam right now, or maybe just
I
like a?
think so.
Let's do it.
I think
Yeah.
Show
so.
what it evolved into.
Well,
Yeah.
can we just give Amy? Can you give like a 1 minute intro to what this whole piece is? Because we've mentioned it a few times.
Okay.
What was this project?
Wow, a 1 minute intro.
1 minute.
Starting. Yeah. Well, okay. So this piece is for 4 vocalizing percussionists and 3 singers. It's inspired by Don Quixote by Cervantes, and it doesn't aim to set in any sort of linear way the novels, but what it does is it takes kind of images that Mark Di Chiazza, the director, and also the person who played in the show, Alonso Quijano, images from the novels and working with those images in order to show Alonso Quijano looking back on his life as Don Quixote. We made this piece with Peak Performances at Montclair State University, who so generously produced it and gave us everything that we needed for 2 years. Not 2 years solidly, but we did week-long workshops every few months to make this piece. And is that?
Yeah.
That's perfect. So we're going to hear an excerpt from, I think that this was in part 2 of the whole thing. And so this is Amy taking the music that she wrote for They Might Be Giants, the piece we just heard, as that study piece, and kind of readapting it for use in this theatrical setting.
Here we go. All right, that seems like a good place to move. Yeah, it's so cool. I also wanted to, I wanted to highlight that we are in Quixote. We were asked to kind of go outside of our comfort zone, So we were. Maybe this one isn't the best example. Like I think we'll see some other ones later. But percussionists are singing. Vocalists are playing percussion and doing really crazy like rhythmic pocket things with their voice, So I think like it really, in addition to being just really great music, I think that it really it pushed us and it kind of made us sort of develop some new skills, which was really kind of cool.
Let's give a special shout out to those singers who killed it in this project: Lindsay Kesselman, Kirsten Salk, and Hai-Ting Chen. really a dream team to work with.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yes, that is Terry laying down with all those instruments strapped to him that we're playing on.
Yeah,
working real hard.
It's so funny because I went into Quixote with really no idea what was going to happen. It's like I wrote these study pieces, but I had no idea how and if they were going to fit into the final project. I didn't even know when we started that we were going to need one, like a Quixote.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that Mark was going to be in the piece
Right.
as Elijah Cano. And so it was a really scary, I think, for everybody, because I had no idea what was happening, but I wanted to do it that way because I thought, this, and it's largely inspired by Heiner Goebbels' way of working, where he makes these big pieces and he doesn't really have a lot of things. He has some things he's been thinking about, from what I understand, and things he wants to try, but nothing really written in stone. And he starts working with the performers from that point, and that I wanted to try that to see what I could learn from the way your bodies move in space, and the way you interact with each other, in addition to the particular talents that you have and the inner charm that you all have as individuals and musicians. And in order to do that, you sort of, you have to start with nothing,
right. Yeah. I even remember the kind of first day, and our first sort of like introduction to the piece and to your ideas about the piece, and how we talked about kind of how we were defining it, and how we were talking about it. And I realized really quickly that it was not, kind of falling in like any one, it wasn't like, it wasn't theater, it wasn't opera, it wasn't really even experimental, it was like, I think I realized quickly that it was really going to be this new amazing thing that was sort of existing on its own. So that, even from the first day, was a fun discovery that we all had together.
Well, Amy, you talked about this in your 1 minute intro, but I'd love to dive into it a little more. The process by which we created this piece was, for us, completely unique, and I don't think we've ever repeated a process like this since then. But it was incredible to find a producing partner like Peak Performances that was so willing to support this very, this kind of strange way of working that you asked us all to participate in, this very long-term way of building this piece. And I think it's because of what you just said that we started with nothing. Literally for the first couple workshops, that there was no music, there was no anything. We all were discovering what the language of the piece was going to be. So we did this over 2 years, right? We had, I don't know, was it like 6 workshops or something over that time?
Something like that. Yeah.
And so when Amy asked us all, so the 4 of us and the 3 singers and the creative team on the piece to be involved, we were all signing up for 6 weeks over 2 years to hang out at this theater, kind of building this piece, in addition to the tech week and the 4 performances at the end. But I feel like that there had to be so much trust between everyone involved in the project to sign on to something like that, because it's not like we signed a contract and you handed us a completed score or anything. We all were part of this journey. Did you have this entire process sort of worked out in your head before we started, or were you also kind of retooling it as we went along?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. You signed a contract and I handed you music that kept changing over and over and over again, right? As we found the piece. Yeah, just having gone through the experience with Eighth Blackbird, and what worked and what didn't work throughout that process. Mark and I, because Mark was involved with both, and we kind of came up with a strategy in some ways. We talked about these week-long workshops and what we were hoping to gain from each one, and how we were thinking of kind of talking about how the piece was going to be made, because that was also something that was very much on our mind. Like, well, how are we going to convince these people, these good people, that we know kind of what we're doing, when the world around them in this piece is constantly changing, and it did require a lot of trust, and so it was tweaked a little bit just because of the nature of things, but essentially, we were doing a lot of the same things. Like all the workshops were videotaped, and I would take those. Mark would save everything and he'd send me all the stuff. I'd take those back to my composer studio and I would study everything. And I would look for little bits in there, that could potentially become something, or ideas that sparked, and so it was this really multi-layered way of working. And you know, I would bring sketches in. I think the first two workshops there were, we used some pre-existing music, like remember Lay and Play, where we were using part of She Is a Myth, and we were making a road on the ground out of books. But I think you guys were singing some of She Is a Myth while that was happening,
and playing it as we were building that road.
And so but at a certain point I started to write material and bring that to you, and then you would work with that unfinished material, mind you, just sketches, and then you'd work with it and I would watch you and listen and take notes, and then take that back to the studio, compose, bring more sketches to the next workshop, and also all the changes from the previous things. So you were constantly getting new music and changes, to existing stuff. And I can't even imagine how stressful that must have been, but you did it. And
well, it's better than not receiving any music at all.
Well, and this way of working is brilliant, because I think theater pieces, I think they're meant to be written on the bodies and in the voices and the instruments of those who are performing them, much like dance is. There's not a lot of difference in my mind. And so I don't think it's not an unusual way to work in dance, and it's not unusual for theater either. For plays, a play will go through multiple drafts before it becomes itself, and it's a similar thing. I don't know why we exist in this world where composers are supposed to have all the answers at the beginning. Why not, do sketches and learn and make mistakes and fail and find, music in a different way.
It's such a good point that how can we expect a composer? They're going to be brilliant and in their composer cave dream up what this piece is, but how can we expect them to know exactly what it's going to sound like on the bodies of the performers, or even until they get into the hall and start doing it in a space like that? They have to be free to make changes. But in our classical music world, I think sometimes we're conditioned to not allow composers to make changes like that. Like I've seen composers try to make tiny little changes at a dress rehearsal right before a concert and kind of get yelled down like, nope, it's too late to make changes. It's like, man, he's just trying to make that a 5/4 bar instead of a 4/4 bar. Like, it's not a big deal,
Yeah, it's a different world, and it's okay. I left the Quixote experience with a saxophone quartet, and I was really on the books, and I was really happy to kind of not have to think about all those things too. So right. It's nice to be able to flip back and forth.
Yeah. I feel like in some ways that project was so, that's like a dream project. We totally got to kind of dive into Sandbox for 2 years and literally play. And at the end, we got to all make a thing. But, the thing I was just thinking about was, Ian, you were saying, I think the process of the piece changing sort of in little increments over those couple of years, or those 6 workshops, I think it got us to a place where when we were in the final week before the performance, you couldn't change anything. We were it was 10 more things. I was like, okay, great. That's totally fine. I feel like we were, simultaneously developing a language, how to work together, how to get us 4 goofy dudes to move around in a not weird way. But then also you kind of taught the 4 of us to be ridiculously flexible. It was just things are changing all the time for lighting reasons, for staging reasons, for costume reasons, for music reasons, for whatever. And so it sort of made us we were forced to be flexible, right?
Yeah, and also it goes back to the idea of trust that we've been talking about. I think all 7 of us that were on stage, we trusted Amy and Mark to not let us down. We knew you weren't, if you made a change, it wasn't so that we were going to forget it and get up there and look like dummies, like the change was actually probably meant to help us in that moment. Like you were noticing something that wasn't working, so you were probably offering a change, or Mark was offering a choreography change or whatever, to make it so that we would be more fluent with the material. But it can be hard. I can sympathize. It's hard to realize that in the moment, when you have 90 minutes of fresh material running through your brain.
Yeah,
we've got some questions, Amy, that we would love to ask you from the folks on the chat. So we were talking about this process of creating this piece, but even before we got into the room together, you and Mark had to go through the process of identifying who the people that were going to be involved with this project were, who the performers were, who the creative team was. So Audrey Holden, who's watching, asks, she's curious about the journey, and could you talk about how everyone in this project came together to work on this? How did you go about finding a community of players to collaborate with?
Hi, Audrey. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, Mark and I came together from working with Abe Blackbird together, and we sort of knew that we wanted to do more of this work together. And I was in love with Sandbox, and so I knew that I wanted you guys to be involved. And my best friend in the world is Lindsay Kesselman, who's this terrific soprano. And I basically said, Lindsay, I need two other voices. Who can you recommend? And she helped me helped us find Kirsten Solik and Hai Ting Chen, who she'd worked with before and trusted with her life. So, and it was, but there were, we had a conversation, a very serious conversation about not just voice type, but personality type, who are going to be the singers who can move well, who are going to be the singers who aren't going to be precious, and who are going to be able to go with the flow and and memorize music. And so she did a really great job of thinking about that. And then the creative team, the lighting design person is somebody that Mark knew, Mary Ellen Stebbins, who worked on a previous project. So it was, some friendships and some friends of friends and that sort of thing. So, but it would definitely, we were looking for particular kinds of people who, first of all, wanted to make work like this, and wouldn't, and if they were afraid of it, would meet that fear without hesitation, which is another great quality that you guys have.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, it reminds me a lot about, like, the four of us talk all the time about how we started our group, like when we were thinking about who should be a part of the four of us, or when somebody leaves Sandbox and we have to find someone new, all the different qualities that we're thinking about when we're deciding who that's going to be. And of course it has something to do with the artistic ability of the person, but it's really not the only thing. One could even argue it's not even the most important thing. It's part of it. It is an important part, but the personality and the work ethic and just the general vibe and the general feeling that the person gives off has such a big thing to do with this. And with this project that we're talking about, spending this much time together and sort of jumping off into the deep end with each other with no safety net in the way that we did, it really required that kind of thought.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Cool.
And there's one other question that I did want to pose to you as well from Alvin. Hi, Alvin. Wondering about how you see the relationship between text and music, which actually I'm curious about as well, and sort of how that led to making percussionists vocalize, how that idea came to you. But I wonder, with text and music, like how do they, like, what's the chicken and egg there?
Oh, that's a great question. Hi, Alvin. How you doing? So yeah, I think music, to me, music is text and rhythm. It comes down to that. I love poetry and I write poetry and I used to write songs, sometimes still do. And so it's because I'm a singer, kind of almost first and foremost. I mean, my pieces are made from my voice. You know, that's my starting point, is the human voice and text, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's no difference to me between that. Text is music, text is rhythm, um, and I can't separate them. I mean, even if I'm writing a piece for 5 bassoons or something, it's
Yeah.
that it's about the melody that I'm singing with my voice, and then trying to translate that into something that bassoons can play, for example. Um,
That's so clear to me in some of those earlier. Well, I guess it happens a little bit in Cobwebs and Cage, but I remember it from some of those early Howl concerts where we would speak these words, but we would just take out the vowels or something like that. Only speak the consonants, you know. And
Yeah.
I mean, the words just take on this completely new character, but it's like using text as like a musical instrument, you know.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Absolutely.
And that approach to like a speech, it's really mostly about timbre, actually. I mean, of course, it's about pitch too, but the content is created from the timbres we make. And so it's almost like the way you say text to music has this kind of blurred edge for you. I almost feel like also voice and percussion has this blurred edge where they're both these timbral expressions.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. I feel like that.
You can guess the question, you know? Trebek.
What is text in music?
Yes. For
Well,
700, please.
Right.
I don't know. You've inspired me.
How about the second part of his question? So about asking the four of us to do a lot of singing and other things outside of our comfort zone, and especially asking the singers they were playing percussion instruments all the time.
Yep. Well, you know, if you're gonna do this kind of thing, you may as well go all the way, right? And so I just decided that everyone was going to be everything, you know. And also it had everything to do with the concept of Quixote. If you remember, because the novel is really a book about books, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about storytelling, and it's about language, and so we were trying to create a world in which books were musical instruments, text was the language of the piece. It was everything to do with that, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if books were going to be the world that we were living in, then everyone would have to participate in the text somehow, you know. And so that's kind of the justification for it, for this piece. And if I was going to make percussionists vocalize, then it was only fair to have the singers play percussion.
Well, I also kind of felt like just by putting everybody on like this even playing field, it was like when it was one person's time to really like to shine at the thing that they do really well, I feel like it like brought so much more like attention, and it made that moment way more special. Like I think a lot about when Lindsay finally gets up there and sings Flower Song. It's just like this moment where we were like, oh my gosh, like it wouldn't have held as much weight if there were a bunch of other songs by like the vocalists before that, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, anyway.
I feel like for all the moments where you were taking us out of our comfort zone, and that applies to the singers and to us, you also still made sure to give everyone a moment to do the thing that on paper was the thing that they were supposed to be there doing, like Lindsay singing that aria, Kirsten with her Death Knight aria at the end there, or us maybe Innocent Returns, the frame drum playing, something like that. There was always a moment where we were allowed to do the thing that we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's called medicine.
It's true. It's true.
I had to give you some medicine to make you still like me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So we've talked a lot about books, and we want to play a little bit of She is a Myth, which was a study piece. It didn't actually make its way into the final piece, but it was an amazing piece that you wrote beforehand. It's featured on our album that just came out a month or so ago. Yes.
The end of it made it into the second.
Totally right. The beautiful vocal trio part at the end.
Remember? Yeah.
That's right.
So we're
going to get to hear that part. We should play that part.
We should play that part.
I just realized that
But
that's
before
not
we
in the
play
excerpt.
any of it, though, Amy, we thought maybe if you wouldn't mind, did you have a book with you by any chance?
Do I? Let me see. I should. I'm a teacher.
Sorry.
Yes, I do. I do have a book.
Everywhere.
I just realized that that I didn't include that in the excerpt of She Is a Myth, but maybe we'll play She Is a Myth, the excerpt I have, and then we'll play the end of Quixote.
Yeah,
Perfect.
cool.
Sure.
If that's
Yeah,
okay.
that sounds great.
So books.
Of course.
This is not a good one, because remember, the books that we used for Quixote had to have something very special. Do you remember what that was?
I thought they all had to be The Rest Is Noise by
They had
Alex
to have
Ross.
that textured cover, right?
Yeah. For the
Alex
book
Ross,
publishing.
yes.
Yeah.
The Rest Is Noise is a perfect book to play.
You destroyed so many copies of The Rest Is. I'm so sorry.
Which is kind of ironic on some level.
Yeah.
But the books that make the best, they have to have linen covers, remember? Because
Linen.
you scrape the linen cover, it sounds like speech. This doesn't do so well. And then there are lots of like things like that. Just all the things you can think of. There's
Yeah.
Page rubs.
page rub.
The long page pull or the short one.
Yes, there's long ones and short ones.
Yeah.
So like before we even learned measure one, we had to, I think you sent us a lot of videos of you doing all these techniques, and we had to learn the language of the piece before we could even start learning it.
Do you remember this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a thunder mouth or something. I can't remember what.
Oh, like
But,
burning.
do you remember, there was like one workshop week where we spent just making an alphabet of book sounds. Yeah.
That's a perfect example. We spent days writing a piece. I mean, it wasn't a piece, but it was a way to develop this language. And that piece has nothing to do with Quixote, except for the fact that the language was used all over the place.
Yeah.
That video's out there somewhere.
I'm sure Mark is going to blackmail us with that video.
My favorite book technique was the birds, the wings.
Oh yes, that one. That was a good one.
You do it reverse, yeah.
You do this.
There it is, yeah.
It was hard to get into that technique. You needed like a few beats of rest to be able to do it. Or what about? Now hold it from the cover and shake. Yeah.
Thunder Book.
That one is terrible for book. That breaks books.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember that person who was really upset?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's right.
I don't remember that.
In the class.
Well, one of the things we should say is that one of the things that somebody mentioned to. I think it was Karen Zorn, the president of Longi. She heard me give a presentation about this way of working, and she said, your process of composing this piece was a performance in some ways, because it was public.
That's right.
Each of the workshops ended with some sort of presentiment where we had to show something. And so it's very unnerving, to think about that and think about, we were so far from being finished with this piece, but yet. Here we are presenting something. And so it does become, you think of the composing process in a kind of way of performance in some ways. So.
It was a nice feeling, though, because at the end of each week, we had to have something to show. Like whether or not that was a real thing or not, we had to perform for like 10 minutes or whatever it was.
And thank God, But so coming back to Terry, you were remembering that lady who was part of one of the classes who came in, and she was very distraught because we were walking on books, we were playing books, we were destroying books, and she just was very upset by this. And so I had to sit down with her and sort of explain that, this is for the love of the book. We're doing this. Create a world out of these things. It's not. There's no abuse here, really. We love them.
Except for the book drop.
Except for the book drop. Oh my God.
Yeah, the whole piece starts with us dropping like hundreds of books out of the rafters on the ground.
Yes.
Vic, do you want to play the thing?
She Is a Myth.
Clip? Sorry.
Yeah, so here's a clip of She is a Myth, which is that study piece that, well, I guess a little part of it ended up in Quixote. But it's a beautiful piece, a piece that we feature on our album, actually, with Amy singing all three of the vocal parts. But we're going to show the score. So Amy came up with this key and this way of notating all of these different book techniques, and that's what we had to learn how to understand to play this piece.
Here we go. Okay, we're back. Thanks so much for listening to that, everyone. So that was She is a Myth. I feel like a radio broadcaster or something. That was only an excerpt of it. That was about half the piece. It's featured on our album and that one too. So if you want to listen to the full piece, it's really amazing. It's on that album that came out a couple months ago. We wanted to just show it with the score because the sounds are really interesting and beautiful on their own, but when you see them kind of like constructed like that in the score and how they're all kind of voiced together, I think it's really interesting. So Johnny,
Yeah, we actually got a few really great questions before even before we kicked off into this. The one that struck me, and then don't worry, Calvin, we'll get to yours as well. But Stephanie had this question about what feeling underscores the impulse of your creative fire, and I feel like especially when I hear "She Is a Myth," I mean, talk about evocative music, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on
that. Well, hi Stephanie. Yeah, I think, somebody asked me once, Roger Brunier, did you guys ever meet him at Peabody? He was the director of the opera. He once asked me.
Right.
He once asked me a similar question. Do you write music to confront your demons, or is it something else? And I think I answered it one way back then, and after it's been 10 years now, and I think the composing process for me is a very dark place. It's not, especially at the beginning of a piece. I struggle a lot with it, and it takes a lot to enter that world. And so I know when I have to go into my composer cave, it's something I have to mentally prepare for, because it's gonna be rough, and I'm gonna feel like shit, and I'm gonna hate everything, and it's just part of my process, for better or for worse. And I think the thing that compels me forward through that muck is knowing that at some point I'm going to forget about everything, and bliss will take over, and 5 hours will pass, and I won't have any idea. And when that starts to happen, then I'm so happy, and there's no happiness like that happiness when you finally find a piece and you understand what it is. So that's what drives it.
That's such an interesting thing to hear, especially right now in this time that we're living in, because I've heard people say, yeah, you have all this, you're home now, you have all this time, you should just like write the best piece that you've ever written. And I think that, when you have when you're comfy in your home and, you have a bunch of time, like maybe that's actually not always the space that you're in that's the most productive or creative space that you could be in as an artist. I don't know if you can equate it to that. But I think it's interesting to hear your own personal process for that,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, there's a big difference between having free time and being in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, which is essentially a psychological trauma that is happening to all of us, as well as a physical one. It's a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so this free time that is being floated in so many articles and blogs and things that I've seen is just it's a false friend. It's not actually real, because many of us are processing, and we're just observing, and we're going to write about it later. But it's for many people, I don't think it's possible to compose right now. I've been doing a little bit here and there, but it's rough.
Yeah, totally. Well,
into that.
Well, we do have some other questions here, right? Sorry, I'm.
Yeah, they're great too.
Muted himself halfway.
Okay, there we go. Oops. Yeah, I know, out of excitement. Calvin, I had a question actually a little bit earlier as well. Can you talk a bit about how you navigate the relationship between the conventional and the experimental, and where the audience fits into your process?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned from Mark DiChiazza, who I worked with on several pieces, he's a director, was when we were working on Columbine's Paradise Theater, we were asked a lot of questions about what the piece is about and how the audience is going to understand what the piece is about. And so, and there was a lot of kind of insistence that, that the piece be direct so that the audience could understand it. And Mark came up with this really great way of talking about what is direct music in a piece like this. And it is that you teach the audience how to understand the piece as it's happening. so there's an accumulation of information, and because of the language of the piece and the alphabet that you choose and the way that you express the information, the audience, the spectator, is going to understand, hopefully, what's being given to them. And so the audience is always on my mind for that reason, not for any reason that has to do with style or whether they're going to like this or not, or it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with, if I say this in this moment, will they remember it, and can they draw from that information and build on it later in the piece if I relate something new back to that? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's about developing a language of expression. So, and then he also wanted to know about, the relationship between the conventional and the experimental. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think in those terms. I just, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, because I've never really thought of any particular moments in any piece as conventional or experimental. They just are. They're just like what's needed in the moment, So that's
and I like your answer about the role of the audience. For you, it's less about hoping that they like it or this or that. It's more just like you're always aware that there's an observer for every piece you write, and that's a crucial element. But you still just write the music that you write, and I think that's that's such an honest approach. I really appreciate that. And then there's Mariana's question as well, which it's a little bit of what you were mentioning earlier, but she says, how do you invent your musical materials? And when writing new pieces, Mariana finds herself getting stuck and burnt out, not knowing where to go next. And what advice do you have for that? I think what you were mentioning about going into this pit of despair and then finding your way out, I think is interesting, but maybe a little more detail on that.
Right. So hi, Mariana. Inventing musical materials. I sing and I sing and I sing and I sing, and I record myself improvising. And before I commit to any ideas when I'm starting a new piece, I just make all of these recordings of me singing. Sometimes I'm dancing around and I make video recordings of me dancing and singing. Sometimes I'm sitting at the piano and I have the video camera pointed to the keyboard so that I'm videotaping my fingers. And it's all about improvisation, and it's all about trying to capture moments. And what I do with these improvisations is that, oh, hi, Katie. Sorry, Bigsby's getting hungry. What I do with these improvisations is I wait some time, and then I go back through them and listen to them. And what I'm listening for are little seeds that could become a piece. And I start transcribing those seeds, and then I improvise with those seeds. And so it basically takes away the notion of invention, and it takes away the notion of being stuck, because if you're just constantly improvising and recording yourself, it's an activity that you can do. It's not like you're going to sit down at a piano and I have to think of something amazing, It's rather, I'm going to just sit down and press record and start singing and see what happens. So the pressure is taken off a little bit, and it allows you to be free. So that's how I deal with it.
It's amazing. I'm seeing advice. Yeah, and I'm seeing such a parallel to even just the evolution of our relationship, performer to composer, that starting from the kernel, and then we got to the moment where we knew Quixote was going to happen. That actually, at the time, it felt like an arrival point, like, oh my gosh, we're finally doing the thing. But in reality, and this is where I feel like it ties into your composition as a process, and you're always between the past and the future, because Quixote has led to new things and to things that we're doing now, and what we're doing now is leading to things that we'll be doing 10 years from now, and that kind of getting out of the rut of everything has to happen right now and into the mentality of we're on the journey regardless, and seeing it that way.
You guys embodied my compositional process. You lived it, I thought it, but you lived it. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of cool.
That is awesome. Yeah.
I'm sure it was kind of painful, but it was cool.
No, it was amazing to be inside of your head in that way, like because you had the flexibility. Like you would have an idea and you would like yell it out, and then we'd try to do it. And again, I just keep going back to this. It's just so amazing that we were given the platform and the time to be able to do this, because in every project that we do, we never have that amount of time or that amount of space. It was just so amazing to have that.
We could not have done it without peak performances.
Yeah.
It would have been our concerts at Lyric Hall,
Yes.
showing up and trying to do it all on the spot.
Which were fun. They were fun. They were fun. Well, we're reaching kind of the end, approaching the end of our stream here. Should we play a couple more recordings, and then maybe Amy Beth, you can talk a little bit more about some of the music you're doing right now?
Sure, sounds good.
Do we want to do Cobwebs and Cage, or should we?
Cobwebs and Cage.
Okay.
Yeah, let's yeah.
All right, give me 1 second here to.
This one, this is maybe one of the harder vocal pieces that the four of us had to participate in this whole project. We had to execute or say these syllables. Well, in some ways it was good for us because it was very rhythmic. So I think we were good at that part of it. But the articulation of these syllables at this extreme tempo was a challenge.
Say that this is a scene from Quixote again.
Yes.
And one of the things that that I was confronted with, because it's a violent book. I mean, there's a lot of violence that is done to Quixote, and so instead of making a fight scene, I decided to deal with violence in a different way. So I broke language, and I just I used the kind of destruction of language as a representation of the violence that happened to Quixote. And so so this is just all the phonemes that they're singing and speaking come from previous text in the piece, but it's just all mashed up and very fast.
Here we go. Okay. That's so cool.
Remember that?
Yes.
So well.
Those moves.
It's nice to watch Carrie dancing. I feel like during the performance, I didn't get to focus on that part.
I know.
We were like building a cage over there in the corner.
That was one of the more, awesome, but also a little stressful, just because the books were like very, very carefully like stacked into this cage,
Yeah,
I remember. Oh, to go ahead.
I thought the video had more of the wall constructing for whatever, because my memory is seeing you guys doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling like that was like this stressful thing. The books were sort of balanced on top of each other.
I was just remembering the math that was involved in that scene. Like you had to remember to pick up like 3 books,
I know,
2 books, and then 4. And if you messed up the math at any moment, someone was gonna like be waiting for a book and you wouldn't be able to give it to them, and it was the worst feeling.
One of the things I
Jerry's
remember,
locked in a cage.
yeah, I remember we
Okay.
were like passing the books. Remember we would pass the books, and like when the music was still like early in the memorized process, there were moments when we would be like holding the books and having to pass them, but we're also like doing this like really complex memorized thing. We'd be just kind of like, like, what am I doing with these again?
Yeah.
It's funny.
Man.
That was a stressful one.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, but awesome. Yeah, it's really cool.
Mark and I did that dance for months.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
You know what we didn't show, and I'm sad about it now, is the actual dance.
Oh. Wait, at
Oh,
the
yeah.
end or
Maybe
You know,
that can
in
be a
The jig.
the jig.
oh,
yeah.
the jig. Right.
Like
It's
Yeah.
on Amy's website. I posted Amy's website.
Yeah.
People want to find
Oh,
it.
okay. It's somewhere.
Yeah, you can check it out there.
We can release that after. Yeah.
They're dancing a jig. It's something to behold.
You can still do that jig.
Amy Beth, I do want to talk a little bit about like what's happening now and in the future, just a little bit before you have to go feed your cat. but I'm curious, like what is happening in this moment and some future projects, even ones that you might be doing together.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the thing I'm in the middle of right now is a big piece for Alarmo Sound, which is kind of a 21st century ghost story called Jacob in Chains, and it's a theater piece. It features the Sinfonietta and actor, and also Beck Plexus as a character who exists only in video. So she's a pre-recorded video soprano, and it's very influenced by Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, as well as kind of bird mythology and ancient texts and Christmas carols. So it's the piece is kind of a mashup of all these things, but it tells a very specific story about a private disaster that happens in the life of this couple. And so it's kind of it resonates with A Christmas Carol in that way. And then you guys and I are embarking on this project called 4x4, which I'm very excited about, which is a series of short pieces. Well, I did this piece for 4 triangles that you might have heard at the very beginning of our broadcast, and I was kind of so inspired by working with you guys on that. I thought, wow, it would be really cool if we could just do 4 of the same instrument and me try and find an interesting approach, to this, for other instruments. And so that's on the docket as well, which I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts about what the next iteration of 4x4 might be, the next instrument that you're looking at?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I mean, it's, yeah.
Could go any direction.
Okay. What is Mount Everest? I'll take.
Right. Yeah.
20 books for 500, please. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to something you were saying earlier about like getting everything you can out of like limited either instruments or material or something like that, which, you've obviously done in May the Devil Take Me. And it sounds like that has happened a lot in Quixote as well. And I'm excited for more of that. We like that.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, should we play the last song?
Yeah. So this you mentioned Beck Plexus, and this is your first work together, I think, right? Can you talk a little bit about this project?
Sure. Yes. So Beck just released an album called Stick Lip, and she commissioned a bunch of composers to write basically a piece for voice and percussion. This was a couple of years ago, and it's kind of slowly evolved into an album of really wacky songs that she has infused her own kind of voice and sound into all of our works. And And so she's a phenomenal artist and singer, and and so this was our first piece together, and her voice is so beautiful, and she's such a free spirit, and it's a fantastic musician that I really couldn't wait to work with her again. And so she's going to be part of the Alarmo Sound piece. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We're speaking to each other in the chat, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I've cropped that part out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so maybe. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you everyone for sticking with us. It's been so much fun having Amy Beth here on our stream. And please check us out next week. We're going to be talking with Viet Quang, who is another really good friend of ours and wonderful person. So hope that we'll see you next week on Sunday, which is the correct day for Sandbox Sunday.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much.
Great with you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for chatting with us.
Thanks, AB.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll leave before listening to this last song because
yes.
it's awesome.
This is awesome. All right, here we go. All right.
William, you have acted too much the stranger. It was only my message that brought you here. You have become, I think, too wise or too backwards, inattentive, disagreeable. I climbed the ground over there to the highest rise, and saw you anything is true. Things anyone is true. William, are you? Anything is true. Things anyone is true. Anything